wasn't sure he supports even a two-state solution. Really? Does he want a one-state solution? A state where Jews and Arabs and all Palestinians can live side by side in peace with full equality, full citizenship? Well, we know the answer to that silly question. But speaking of a two-state versus one-state solution, you know, once upon a time I thought that maybe a two-state solution made some sense. After all, I reasoned, while it would have been far more appropriate and just for the great powers at the end of the war to have created a state for Israel, as I say, out of a portion of Germany or somewhere else, nevertheless, like the white man living on the red man's land in these United States, Israel is now a fact of life. And so I thought a two-state solution made some sense. But as time has gone by, I've come to realize that only a one-state solution really makes any sense, and that only a one-state solution is a just solution. Why? It's really pretty obvious. By now, after all of these decades of illegal occupation of Palestinian land, after all of the Israeli settlements have been built, after all the miles of wall have been built that balkanizes whatever might be left of a Palestine, what is there left upon which the Palestinian people could reasonably be expected to establish a viable Palestinian state? Oh, I guess they could do it technically, but it would be so balkanized, so diminished as a state as to be non-viable, and certainly such a solution is grossly unjust, especially when one remembers that the world did not have the right in the first place to put Israel where they put it. I might add in this regard that I am in principle opposed to any religious state, be it Jewish or Catholic or Muslim. And finally on this matter, let me hasten to add that while I now believe that only a one-state solution is practical or just, that this really is a decision that belongs solely to the people of Palestine. It's really not my business to tell them to press for a one-state solution if they want to press for a two-state solution. If they were to do that, I think they are being generous in the extreme, but I can understand why they might do that. The Jewish population of Israel is, of course, concerned that if there were to be a single state comprised of the present population of Israel and the remainder of the Palestinian people, that they would be quickly outnumbered and they would find themselves a minority in Israel. And they are, of course, correct. They would be a minority in Israel, just as today the white settler population of South Africa finds itself a minority within the state of South Africa. Such is the consequence of prior acts of injustice by one people upon another. And just as the former brutal settler population of South Africa has had to learn how to live in that country, side by side with the majority population that they previously oppressed under apartheid, so too, if the one-state solution were to be implemented, will Israel have to learn to live side by side with the former majority population that was Palestine, whose people they formerly oppressed with their own apartheid-style governmental regime. Such is the cost of justice. And now a question that often comes to my mind, and I suspect to the minds of many of you gathered here today: why is it that there is so little understanding and sympathy for the Palestinian people amongst the people of America? Why is it that despite the decades of suffering by the Palestinian people, most Americans still support whatever Israel does, or even if taking exception to some particularly outrageous act by Israel, nevertheless blame it in the main, that conflict, on the Palestinian people? Well, I think there are several rather obvious reasons for this anti-Palestinian tilt in public opinion, in public approval, and in public caring for the people of Palestine. First, there's the corporate media in the United States. After all, they represent the interests of the rest of corporate America. You know, the corporate America that makes the munitions Israel uses to slaughter the Palestinian people. And they represent the same corporate America that wants to steal all of that oil in the Middle East and say they know what to print so that the American people will believe that that oil is, first of all, rightfully ours, and that it's the Arabs and the Muslims whose oil it really is, who are our enemies and who have no right to keep their oil. In the minds of the average American, the Palestinian freedom fighter, with his homemade rocket, trying to defend his people against the fourth largest military in the world with the backing of the world's largest military, is no different than the guys who flew those planes into the World Trade Center. They're all terrorists. They're all the other, the foreigner, the enemy. And while the Jews of Israel are seen simply as the victims of the Holocaust, the worst genocide the world has ever seen, And Israel is simply seen as a democracy, we are told. And Israel is our friend, we are told. So we can thank the U.S. corporate media for a good measure of the pro-Israeli and anti-Palestinian attitude of the American people. Of course, when giving thanks to America for its unquestioning support for Israel, the people of Israel must also remember to thank the so-called two-party electoral system in America. Because Democrat and Republican alike are always faithful to Israel. After all, there is campaign money to be secured. There are votes to be secured. And any politician in this country who turns her back or his back on Israel, or even dares to criticize Israel's policies too harshly, will find, come election time, that all of corporate America, for the reasons I've stated a moment ago, will turn their back on that American politician and close their wallets to that politician. And so although some members of the Jewish population in this country were nervous when Obama was running for president, they need not have worried. Oh, he may talk a bit more gently when talking about peace in the Middle East, but he's as big a supporter of Israel as any other politician. And that is why, while running for the presidency, he held that lengthy pre-election closed-door meeting with the leaders of the Jewish lobby in this country in order to assure them, out of sight and sound of cameras and microphones, that he backs Israel 100%. Indeed, politicians in this country are loath to say or do the slightest thing that might make the Israeli lobby label them as unfriendly to Israel. Hell, for decades now, the Congress and Justice Department of the United States have refused to even raise a finger in protest over the fact that AIPAC does not even have to really register as a lobby or a foreign agent. Mind you, they quack like a duck, they walk like a duck, and lobby like an agent for a foreign power, lobby like hell for that power, but they don't have to register as such. Yes, the Israeli lobby in this country is very, very effective and very necessary to the Israeli cause. And that's why Finkelstein's book, exposing the role of the Israeli lobby, was so bitterly attacked by the pro-Israeli forces in this country. Hell, as Jimmy Carter learned, even a beloved former president can catch hell if he dares to challenge the blind, unquestioning U.S. support of Israel or suggest Israel might be doing something improper in its relations with the Palestinian people. And boy, have the Israelis ever done something wrong, something very wrong. Now, I don't have time today to recount all of the things that Israel has done wrong over these past many decades, but let me spend just a few minutes discussing what they did wrong in Gaza most recently. And when I say wrong, I mean criminally wrong, war crimes wrong, crimes against humanity wrong. And for a full listing of what I'm now about to rather quickly summarize, you can go to the National Lawyers Guild's website, which is simply www.nlg.org, and read the entire report from the recent delegation of Guild members who went to Gaza during the recent Israeli war there. But just to summarize, during Israel's recently 22-day-long offensive in Gaza, their forces killed more than 1,400 Palestinians, including several hundred children. They injured more than 5,300 Palestinians, at least 1,600 were children. The overwhelming majority of those killed were civilians. The evidence gathered by our delegation shows that Israel violated international law by directly and willfully killing civilians, often in the most horrifically brutal and deliberate way. It violated the international legal principle of proportionality by responding to those homemade rockets coming from Gaza with a devastatingly massive attack on all aspects of life and property in Gaza. Its attack was so massive and so out of proportion to the response coming from Gaza that it redefines as well what is meant by the term collateral damage in terms of the people and schools and homes and hospitals that were destroyed. It used weapons like white phosphorus illegally and used them indiscriminately in civilian areas. It denied medical care to the injured in violation of international law. It went beyond that by actually targeting medical facilities themselves, including medical facilities of the United Nations, causing that body to withdraw its personnel who were attempting to help the civilian population of Gaza. And this does not begin to tell the whole story. After all, for more than a year and a half prior to that 22-day-long